Because I sent him a warning note after we recorded here like 2 weeks ago when I went on a huge rant against Craig. And I was like, this was a particularly intense episode. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I'll listen to it. And the opener is Craig saying, what an asinine question. And my dad's like, wow, good start. Welcome to the Georgia Politics Podcast. It is Friday, March 15th. I am Preston Thompson, joined by a solo co-host for the day, taking it back from our usual panel of 7, 8, 9, 10, and we're getting rid of the partisan hacks, and we're just bringing in the strictly unbiased, unpartisan Hans Appen.
Respected by both sides.
You'd say so, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, one look at your Twitter feed and you say, this guy is purely down the middle.
That's a fake account.
It's
a Russian bot. No, that's not me.
The Russian bot at Hans Appen. Okay, well, that's good to know. I'll stop following them then.
I should probably report that one just to get that off the internet.
Good.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a little bit different of a show today. I'm going to quickly update everybody on a couple things that happened at the Capitol this week. There was still legislation going through, but after that, we're just going to take some listeners' questions that have been kind of feeding in since we started the show. And Hans and I will go back and forth and get those answered. We do have a new voice line number that you can call in over the next couple weeks, leave a voicemail, and we will play the recording on the show as we answer the question. I'll plug the number here and at the end of the show so everybody's got it. 770-376-7403. Call in, leave us a voicemail, and we'll play it on the show.
You will actually appear on the Georgia Politics Podcast.
We'll cyber technology your face into the video.
Yes.
With your permission, of course. So
if you don't want to be on the show, maybe don't call and leave a voicemail, because if you call and leave a voicemail,
we will put you on the show.
You're probably going to be on the show.
Yeah. Or you can use extensive profanity, and then we probably won't put it on the show way either. But then Daniel will have to listen to it, and that's not good for him.
And if you're an elected official and want to call and leave a message, double points.
Double points?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, HB 316, we've talked about it maybe 4 or 5 times on this show. The voting machines bill passed out of the Senate after an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of debate. It is going to the governor's desk. He is going to sign it very quickly. And then the quote unquote bidding process will start for the machines. Now, is it a true bidding process? Probably not. Legally, it has to be. But the estimation that's in the piece of legislation was basically given to the governor's office by a company called ES&S, who has a staffer in the governor's office who used to be a lobbyist for them, is the deputy chief of staff. Now, I've been asked this already. I want to go ahead and pose it to you. It's not a listener question unless you count me as a listener. The deputy chief of staff, Brian Kemp, used to be a lobbyist for ES&S, who has submitted the proposal to provide the new voting machines for Georgia, which are surrounded by controversy of being vulnerable to cyber attack and all that. Is that a conflict of interest, having that person in the governor's office? And show your work.
Sure. So I think one of the things that you have to consider, and I'm going to throw this back at you, and you may not know the answer, but I think it's important to consider where that company ranks in the world of election machine generation. Are they the best out there?
They'd certainly tell you that, yeah.
Well, are there 100 different companies like that, or are there 3? And it's hard to avoid some conflicts of interest.
Somewhere in the middle of those two numbers. The thing that strikes me, they're somewhere in the middle, to answer your question. I think some cybersecurity experts were saying not only are these machines in general not the safest option, but these specific machines are also not the safest option. I don't know. I'm not an expert there. Don't know the validity there. But, Brian Kemp used to be Secretary of State. Secretary of State oversees the state elections. They oversee this kind of procedure. And this person was a lobbyist for a voting machine company. I don't think it is that out of the question that they develop a relationship and then Governor Kemp sees some potential in this person and then hires them on to his team. It doesn't strike me as a huge conflict of interest. I mean, the lobbying industry down there I know people see it as this real dirty game and this kind of backroom cigar kind of game. And in some ways, I would say there is an under the table element to it. But you develop relationships with these people, you use them as resources. I don't know that it's really that out of the question that one of them comes on and joins the team.
Sure. Well, and I think it's important to consider the quality of the firm and how many are out there, because that the conflict of interest, it's hard to define in this situation. Hypothetically speaking, Governor Kemp is not personally financially benefiting from this, and he may know based off of this relationship that he has that this is one of the highest quality companies that produces these election machines, and they're priced fairly, and it could be perfectly above board. But that being said, if there's 100 other companies out there that build a similar quality at a similar price, this would seem to be kind of an unnecessary perceived conflict of interest.
Sure. I also think, though, the solution to it is relatively easy. I mean, you just kind of, when this open bidding discussion hopefully does happen and there's a level playing field for companies to come in and pitch their products, I think just having the right people recuse themselves from that decision, I think at least removes that cloud a little bit. I don't think it has to be the governor.
Be?
Probably, yeah. I mean, the deputy chief of staff wouldn't be involved heavily in that decision anyway. I mean, maybe it's just a public relations emphasis that, hey, this is with the Secretary of State's office, and I will take whatever their recommendation is. And then if those happen to line up, the Loretta Lynch method of,
Sure.
Yes, this is my purview, but I'm going to step out for a little bit, and I will take the recommendation, the public recommendation of whatever these people say. We'll be sure to keep everybody updated on what that looks like going forward, but it did make its way out of the Senate this week. House Bill 481, the dubbed Heartbeat Bill, was assigned to Senate committee this week, so it has not been voted on yet. It is in the Science and Technology Committee, not Health and Human Services. Science and Technology right now is chaired by Senator Renee Unterman. I'm sure that is some part of the calculation. I'm a little bit confused why it made its way over into Science and Technology, but
Who's chair of Health and Human Service Committee?
Dr. Watson, Senator Watson.
Okay.
I believe. I don't think it's super clear. I think the general assumption right now is Renee Unterman is in favor of the bill. She has not given a huge indication that she's going to vote against it. She is playing it a little by the book. She's not trying to shove it through, I don't think, at this point. There was maybe 4 hours of public testimony on Thursday, and it never came to a vote even. So there is still time for amendments to be added, language to be changed. Language has already been changed a little bit, but all the essentials that we remember from our previous discussion are still there. It will make its way out of Science and Tech eventually and come to the floor for a vote, where it is more likely to pass the Senate than it was to pass the House, in my opinion. So I think we will see this on the governor's desk before the year is over.
So assuming it passes the Senate, does it go straight to the governor's desk, or does it need to go back to the House for any reason?
That remains to be seen on what happens in committee, I think.
Okay.
I am not sure whether that's already the case. It might be because some language has changed, but once it comes out of committee, we'll have a clearer picture of, okay, this will have to go back now. And yeah, that, there were a slew of protests down at the Capitol this week. This is not an issue that anybody is laying down and considering over. So if it does have to go back to the House, the fight will continue to ramp up, from people going down to the Capitol and making sure their voices are heard. But on the Capitol steps, inside and outside, in the gallery, I mean, it is a packed house down there. The last couple days.
I saw the red robes and
the Handmaid's Tale imagery can be a little shocking when you see a legislator just kind of staring at their phone, walking right past it. So it will certainly be interesting to see what comes out of that. There are no minced words when it comes to this bill. Tune in and watch some of the testimony if you ever get a chance, and we'll try and bring you whatever changes happen to the bill as they happen.
Could you foresee any changes in the language that are so drastic that it could change votes if it were to go back to the House?
Change votes either positively or negatively.
Or is this baked in at this point?
I don't think anything's going to attach to it that will change it that drastically. There are some elements on there that we talked about of giving, an embryo or an unborn child, whatever the terminology you use is, citizenship status, basically. That language is really tricky. And I think part of the reason it's in there is to help with an eventual court challenge. That could change a little bit, but that's not the essential meat of what people are voting on here. I think that's kind of something the Democrats are using to point to of, look at this. This is kind of strange and ridiculous. And it's something Republicans are using as kind of a show of force and a strategy going into what will be an eventual court fight. It will go to the courts.
Sure.
So if Brian Kemp does sign this into law, there will be a lot of people very prepared to take this to court, and we will see a very similar fight like we've seen in some other states across the country.
It is likely this will still be a point of conversation in November of 2020.
Yes.
Which I guess
we'll be here.
We'll be here.
All right, let's get to some listener questions. Hans, why don't you start us off with one that you've got prepared for us here, so I can stop talking for a little bit.
All right, let's see here. These were great questions. Thanks for sending them in, everybody. But I'm going to start with Janet from Dalton, who asked, "Can you explain exactly what issues Democrats have with the new voting machines?
Oh, good.
Please and thank you."
Well, we just talked about this a little bit. I would say the strongest point from someone who doesn't have this subject particularly down pat that I've seen from Democrats is, listen, these are not issues that we have with the machines. These are issues that the cybersecurity industry has with these machines. So I think me personally, whenever I get into political arguments, debates, whatever you want to call them with people, I'm always incredibly inclined to say, listen, I'm not an expert on this. You're not an expert on this. Look at these people who are. They went to school for 10 years to become an expert on this. They've been writing on the subject for 20, and they're an associate professor at University of I know what I'm talking about, and they have presented us with this information. I think that's their strongest point. Out of the SAFE Commission that Brian Kemp established, there's one cybersecurity expert, and he has said that these are a bad idea. That's, I think, their best point. There are also concerns of how auditable the machines will actually be. And this has a lot to do with the machines aren't actually set in stone. So Republicans right now are thinking of the eventual product, printing out basically a receipt after you make your votes that will say, here's who you voted for governor, and then check. Here's who you voted for lieutenant governor, check. And then hopefully they will say, here are races you did not log a vote for. I think that's a really important element in these. I think a lot of Democrats are afraid that those receipts, which they have been on other machines, I don't know if they're machines actually in use across the country, but there are other machines that exist out there that print a receipt as a barcode, which is not auditable by the human eye. So I think they see that as a danger too. The ability for the voter to audit their own vote and make sure this is actually what I wanted to do. Because there were issues that were reported from several voters of, I tapped Stacey Abrams and the checkmark came up Brian Kemp, or vice versa. And that's not something you want as someone who's rattling through because they got a meeting to get to and it prints out the thing and you have to take personal responsibility for making sure your vote is right, but it shouldn't be switching up on you like that.
So it's more about what the experts are saying and less about what they didn't get. I mean, I guess it's kind of both.
What they didn't get in terms of
what they would have preferred.
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly an alternative on the table. It's not like the Democrats...
They're not out there saying, we don't like this because you didn't give us this. They're saying, we don't like this because what you're offering has existing issues.
Basically. There is an alternative out there, a bill proposed by a couple high-ranking members that basically are what the Democrats would want. To give, an outline, a legislative-looking outline of what it should look like according to them. So it's not like they haven't come up with a alternative recommend, and that alternative is hand-marked paper ballots. So yeah, it's still an ongoing discussion, but lots of cybersecurity experts have come in. And we hashed this debate out a couple weeks ago on here. It's more entrenched across party lines than you might think.
Yeah. All right.
So let me get to one that I will pose to you, Hans. Let's look at our list here. Jennifer from Roswell asks, is there a viable next best candidate for the Democrats to run against David Perdue if Stacey Abrams runs for president? I don't even think we need to include if Stacey Abrams runs for president, because she just might not run for anything this year.
Yeah. Well, did you see the latest? Is Stacey going to run as Joe Biden's announced vice presidential?
Yeah. This is making my tinfoil hat look a little less tinfoil.
Yeah.
Because I mentioned a couple weeks ago, she's shopping the field not to see whether or not she runs for president, but to see if I don't run for anything this year, can I lock in half of the field, which is 14 candidates right now? Can I get 7 of them to say they'd pick me as their VP if they won the nomination? So if she's the locked-in VP for Harris, Biden, Sanders, Beto, all of the leaders right now, Booker, then she just sits back and has a great time until she's picked to go speak on these issues.
And if it doesn't happen, run for Senate.
Well, it'll be too late by then.
Yeah.
It'll be way too late by then. Because you got to declare a VP by time of convention.
Well, then she'd stick around for round 2 with Governor Kemp,
which is kind of what she wants to do anyways. Yeah. But anyways,
so let's answer the question. So there is only one name that I can think of that has maybe the experience or the clout or name recognition to jump into the race and give Senator Perdue a real shot. And I think that's former acting Attorney General Sally Yates. Now, I know she has said publicly that she has no interest in it. Beto said publicly he had no interest in running for president, as did, I'm sure, half the field. Other than that, I know a few episodes ago, Eamon mentioned the former mayor of Columbus.
Teresa Tomlinson. That would be my pick, by the way, as probably who's next in line. One of the only prominent females out there that is still kind of waiting on to see what Abrams decides to do, because, like you mentioned, Sally Yates has backed off a little bit more than most that are waiting on the bench.
Well, and I guess I could see a dark horse candidate, somebody from the business world, like David Perdue, come in with a lot of money and make waves, but it seems like the bench is kind of short.
It is a little short.
I mean they'll put somebody up. I think the part of the question that trips me up is a viable next best candidate.
So someone with a fighting chance, basically, is what they mean. Yeah,
exactly.
Because right now, if Stacey jumps in, most people see it as a coin flip race.
Sure. Yeah.
I do, definitely.
I can see that.
But if somebody with less name recognition, somebody without kind of a proven record or without an existing volunteer base like we're talking about now comes in, it no longer becomes so coin flippy. I think the other names I've heard are Jason Carter, former gubernatorial candidate, and John Ossoff, failed District 6 candidate. Neither of those, for me, rank above Teresa Tomlinson. But they're both out there, and they're both doing things. It is right now that those three, and I guess maybe Sally Yates too, even though she's backed off, are just waiting to see what Abrams decides to do, which I believe she has said she's giving herself basically March. So we will know very soon. Maybe even like right now before we put the show on air.
Could you see Mayor Bottoms jumping into the race?
I think she likes her job.
Yeah.
Quick shout out, by the way. Did you see how she entered the State of the City address?
Yes.
Pretty incredible. Playing, what's it called? Who Runs the World by Beyonce, surrounded by female police officers. Like, much more dramatic than other State of the States, State of the Union, State of the Cities I've seen in the past. Very cool. But no, I think she likes her job. I think she probably does have a future. It's funny. I was, before all this stuff of the last couple of years, I thought Kasim Reed would have been viable too. But
Yeah.
I don't think the party or maybe him at this point want to come anywhere near that.
Well, it wouldn't shock me. I'll say
Mhm.
that, but I wouldn't count on it.
I do think what you can expect is if Stacey announces she's running for Senate, there will be no Democratic primary. There is a tier 1 with one person, and then there's a tier 2 with 5. So by that same token, if she says she's running for something else or she's not running at all, there will be a primary. And they will have a sprint to get going, get it figured out, and go because they will likely not have a lot of time.
Sure.
So, in 2 days, you can expect all of this to be shaken out at any point around now. So
I was wondering yesterday who would be the biggest benefactors and the folks who stand the most to lose if Stacey gets into the race. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Because
into
presidential
the
race,
presidential race.
who would have the most to lose in terms of other candidates, I suppose?
Sure.
You start drawing the Beto Abrams comparison. They're both candidates that overperformed their races in conservative states. So you start comparing models of who did better. So maybe Beto has a little bit more to lose because there's someone that now has a similar background to him.
That's not who I had in mind.
Who did you have in mind?
Kamala Harris.
You think so?
Mm-hmm. I think her game plan is to try and get through Iowa and New Hampshire relatively unscathed and get to South Carolina as fast as she can.
Well, and California has moved up
Right.
in the primary schedule, which is a huge help to her.
Right.
That's why she's near the top of the betting favorites, is because California will come soon.
But
Georgia
if she could place second or third in Iowa and New Hampshire, win South Carolina, and win California,
right,
she will be hard to beat.
and she will be here in 7 days. Kamala Harris will. Yeah, I think that's interesting. Georgia, I don't know, has set their primary date yet.
I don't know.
So no, those are both interesting answers.
Who do you think would have the most to gain
by Stacey entering the race?
Entering the presidential race.
Gosh, the older candidates, because I think with more younger candidates entering the race and the mayor of South Bend, Pete Buttigieg, being more successful, the issue now becomes, does experience matter? And when people answer yes, there are 2 candidates, basically 2 to 3 to choose from. If people answer not as much, it doesn't matter to me as much, there are like 7 or 8 or 9 candidates to choose from, depending on where you draw that line of experience. Like I would say Kamala Harris is an experienced candidate, even though she's relatively young. So anyways.
Okay. Fair enough.
Tune into our national politics podcast that we're launching immediately after this one. Yeah.
All right, let's pick a question for you, Preston. Okay, here's one. Kristen from Augusta says, I'm new to the show and the state and want to learn more about Georgia politics. Thanks for doing the show.
You're welcome.
You're welcome, Kristen. My question is, would the legislative session be made better by adding 20, 30, or 40 more days to the session? Whoa.
Yeah.
Preston's sleep schedule would not be made better.
But my payroll schedule would be
That's
made a little
true.
bit better. I don't think so. I think some people look at crossover day, which is a day that legislators are there until midnight, and say, boy, wouldn't this be easier if we could spread it out and have like a crossover week? There's always going to be hard deadlines. There's always going to be legislators pushing things through. I think the schedule, there are days right now where you go into session, you go through the parliamentary procedure of chaplain of the day and announcements and morning orders and resolutions, and you've got the Consulate General of Ireland there. And then there's one vote. So I think right now the schedule could be made a lot better than it is. And there are lots of factors of why it's so challenging to evenly distribute votes across the spectrum. But I think adding another 20 days, there's still a hard deadline for crossover. There's still sine die the last day of session. There's still going to be those things. Now, if we were to do something like that, I think it would be interesting to see a session that goes January and February and then July, August, and split it up, because there's already like an amended budget that has to come through halfway through the other budget, and that could change some things for the better. But the other thing I think people have to consider is right now, as a part-time legislature, the people who can do the job are doctors, lawyers, retired people. There are sprinkles of people who don't meet one of those three things. And it is rare to find something like that. If you're a teacher, you want to be a legislator? Sorry, it's not going to happen. So making it 60 total days eliminates that even more, unless you just go straight to a full-time legislator and now people are getting paid $40, $50, $60,000 a year to come do this. And then maybe that opens the door a little more. But right now, just the structure of it is so limiting for people. I mean, you have to be there every day in the Capitol. And by the way, you have legislators from Chatham County and Savannah who have to be there every day. So it's not just people who are commuting back and forth from their midtown law firm.
So who or what determines that schedule?
I believe the Constitution of Georgia,
So
which would mean a 2/3 majority vote, and the House could change it.
Can you see 2/3
No,
wanting
no.
to work
There
more?
are
more
issues.
days?
There are issues against on both sides. I don't know a lot of issues for it. I think instead what you do is you find ways to tinker with the existing schedule of, can we have multiple crossover points, or can we schedule votes based around this? Can we set deadlines for out of committees and things like this? And people will always find a way to try and sneak things in at the last minute or something like that. There's also a habit with legislators that they can't be sitting still for too long. So if you have a legislator in an 80-day legislative session propose something on day 18, you think they're just going to sit there until day 50? So if anything, they propose something on day 18 and then they just coast until day 40, and they don't feel the need to put anything they may not consider to be, needless out on the floor. But I think it's an interesting idea. But already it's just so restricting on different jobs. And if we did go to an extended session, I'd want, the first week of every month of the year. Something like that, I think, would be interesting.
So, Kristen, it's not out of the realm of possibilities, but doesn't sound.
Yeah,
likely.
because Lord knows I make all those decisions. Yeah. All right,
Okay,
let's get one to
give
you,
me
Hans.
one.
Yeah. Jonathan from Winder asks, what's up with the bill that eliminates the January 31st filing deadline for campaign disclosures?
So I want to get your take on this too, because I think you probably know a little bit more of the details of the who and why it's being suggested and introduced. But I read this and I just thought, it just seems nakedly
Power grabby.
I mean, this is, we looked at a bill to redistrict recently. Where was that? That was
with two reps out there by like Stone Mountain,
Yeah.
I think, where it was an equal trade between Republican and Democrat to lock in their own districts or something.
And the quotes that were reported in the AJC were just, they're the sorts of things you don't
Blatant.
think people would say out loud.
Sure.
Of course they're saying them in private, but they're saying, I want to redistrict so that my reelection is more likely. This seemed like another one of those that, why? It just seems like a power grab. And what are you trying to hide? And you're being blatant about wanting to hide it.
So I agree with you, but where this came from was the Office of Ethics and Transparency. There's a little bit of confusion on why they recommended it, I think, but in general, the filing deadlines are confusing, and it was the one that legislators and people required to do it most often missed. But to me, this seems like we're having a hard time getting these people to follow these guidelines that are set in place for, civilian transparency. So let's just eliminate the guidelines rather than, I don't know, find a way to teach the legislators.
Sure.
Or teach isn't the right word, but basically make, I think, would be a more appropriate word. But yeah, and it's not even this specific deadline happens directly before legislative session. So the scenario is you have a meeting with a lobbyist 2 days before session starts. By the way, you're not allowed to fundraise during session. You're obviously talking to lobbyists, but you cannot accept money or anything like that. So you meet 2 days before session starts. They really want something forward. Here's, $8,000 towards your next campaign. And then we, as the, citizenry, I don't know if that's the right word, but we do not hear about it until June. So that's the scenario in which that's kind of bad and a nightmare.
Yeah.
So that's why the deadline is there in the first place. And I'm pretty sure everybody has recoiled on this one. It's one of those things where if you draw a picture of something and you look at it and it looks right to you, and as soon as you show it to somebody else, they go, "What?" And it's just
While
when
it's
you're
coming out of your mouth,
I
you just
know.
instantly
And
wish you could put
when
it
you
back.
draft things with legislative counsel, their job is to make sure things are following the right legal guidelines, they're referencing the right code section. They don't come back to you and say, "Hey, this is a bad idea," or they don't come back to you and say, "Hey, this is a great idea." They just, their job is to nod their head up and down and say, "Yeah, I'll make that happen." And they have attorney-client privilege too, so they cannot go around talking to people about what's being proposed. So a lot of times somebody will go into legislative counsel following the recommendation of somebody, and that's only two people who have had to think about this. It's not like, sometimes we think about how did that get put on a t-shirt, and somebody had to go manufacture that, and that had to go through quality control, and there was a whole board that looked at this t-shirt and they still managed to put that on this t-shirt. It's not really like that. In a small bubble of these two people, maybe this seemed like, oh, this is a good idea, we'll just clean up the system. I think they call it in the legislature, I hear it all the time, it's like a cleanup bill where they're changing a section of code just to make it easier to understand. I think they probably thought this was something like that, but it has consequences that are
And you're saying it also is coming across as just lazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes
Don't
across
like
to me
it, so
as
just get away with it.
is not that we don't like it, but like, it's the one that everybody misses, and it's kind of hard to remember sometimes, and it falls right in session when everybody's just so busy. Yeah, but I don't take any of those as really proper excuses for this.
Okay. Good question. Next one for Preston. This is a good one. Dwayne from Barrow County asked, he wants to know what our thoughts are and would appreciate a discussion on the resurgence of conservatives in America reacting to the liberal socialist message.
Okay, this one's for me.
Yeah, that's for you.
Okay, so
I might have some thoughts.
Those watching on the video can see that I'm taking my host cap off. Host cap is off. Democrat hat is coming onto the head. So I am now Preston, Democrat, no longer Preston, host.
Okay, noted.
There is a perception right now in the Democratic Party that no matter who they nominate for president, so the most moderate candidate right now is Joe Biden. And don't worry, I'll get this back to the state level in a bit. The most moderate candidate right now is Joe Biden. If we were to nominate Joe Biden, he would still be a liberal socialist, the most left-leaning candidate to ever run for public office. Part of that is buried in some truth, that the Overton window is what it's called, what's acceptable to talk about basically, has shifted because of mostly the Sanders 2016 campaign kind of shifted the window of, hey, Medicaid for all is actually something we can talk about. And, universal basic income, for better or for worse, is something we can actually talk about. So regardless of who the nominee is, they will be the most socialist candidate the Democratic Party has ever had, according to the Republican Party. In the Georgia legislature, a lot of the sitting Republicans used to be Democrats. I don't know how many are left right now, but there was a shift that happened in the early 2000s where Democrats swapped parties, and there is a younger blood of Democrats right now. I would say that makes up the majority of the Democratic Party right now, that has basically come from a different party. And it is a difficult thing to reconcile. This is a change I think the country went through years ago. I'm probably not old enough to have great perspective on it, but it's almost like you see like Top Gun has just released in parts of East Asia or something. They're like however many years behind us. Like Georgia is kind of like that in the political makeup of the two parties. The Democratic Party is starting to become more of what we're seeing this session. And I think a lot of us knew that after the Abrams campaign, this was going to be the most watched session we've had in a long time. And I think the parties are changing their makeup a little bit. And also just, I'll throw out this last little sentence there and then I'll let you chime in, is the really left-leaning issues and the really right-leaning issues are clearly the best fundraisers both parties have. Social conservatism is the best fundraiser this country has ever known. So I wouldn't completely count that out of it either. But so I think it's a combination of those two things that I mentioned.
Okay. Good points. I'll add a couple.
Yes, please.
So
My Democrat hat is off now. My
Off,
host hat is
back to
back
moderating.
on, and
Okay.
I'll send it to Hans. Yeah.
So I'm really gonna dissect Dwayne's question here. I think he's kind of making 2 points: the resurgence of conservatives in America reacting to the liberal socialist message.
Mhm.
So he's pointing out that conservatives are reacting to it, I guess, as opposed to ignoring it, and 2, noted, Dwayne, that you didn't say the liberal message, you said the liberal socialist message.
That's why I went into that first tangent
Sure.
about the label.
So I have 2 thoughts on that. One, and they're tongue-in-cheek thoughts, I guess. One is it is interesting to me how triggered people on social media get with AOC and the younger freshman House Democrats that were just elected in November. She has a voice in Congress, but her ability to actually turn the United States into a socialist country is about as likely as my ability to turn the United States into a socialist country.
Let me mention something
She's
real
one
quick.
of
400 something House
400
members.
something House members. One of how many Democrats?
240.
40 plus 47 Democratic senators, and there are 2 socialists.
So that's what I was going to mention, is that there are 2 identifying Democratic socialists serving in either the House or the Senate nationally right now, and it's the 2 who you would think of.
And I bet you if you took a poll of your average American and you ask them what Elizabeth Warren identifies as, a capitalist or a socialist, probably the majority would tell you she's a socialist, which I think goes to the point that the term socialist has kind of just lost its meaning. It doesn't mean anything anymore. Elizabeth Warren is a capitalist. And I think to Dwayne's point about conservatives reacting to that, take it for what it is, but we live in Donald Trump's America, and he is the Twitter president. So
Sure.
I think it's here to stay for at least 2 more years. So.
Sure. And there is a long history of the pendulum swinging back and forth. And if you want to look in Georgia at the Stacey Abrams phenomenon, if that's the word for it, even though she lost, she outperformed expectations. She got a larger donor base, volunteer base, movement than anybody expected. So there is a movement in Georgia now as almost a recoil to that. I mean, you look at Clinton gets elected in 1992, and then you have Newt Gingrich's Contract for America a couple years later. Obama comes in with a Democratic majority, and then you have the Tea Party movement that comes in and takes away that. So, I think it's a natural ebb and flow.
For everything, there's a season. And Craig, who's a regular panelist on this show, has said several times on this show that he will live to see a day when the Georgia state legislature flips blue again.
Right. And I will probably live to see a day when it comes back.
Sure. Yep.
So I think there is a natural ebb and flow to these things. Yeah.
So thank you for the question, Dwayne. I'm not quite sure if we answered it, but that was our stab.
We talked about it for a while, and that's all we can do.
Yeah. So I think this is the last question.
We got 2 more.
2 more?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Taylor from Atlanta asks.
Oh, yeah. I missed that one. Go ahead.
Does the city of Atlanta have any recourse available to them if the state votes to take over the airport?
Is that for me?
Well, I'll give you my short answer.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah. That was kind of my answer, too. We talked a little bit about this on last week's episode. And according to Craig, the answer is no. I can't imagine that the city wouldn't file some sort of suit to prevent it. How viable that they would have any chance of winning that suit, I have no idea.
Well, let's fall into our expertise then.
Sure.
They certainly have some public relations recourse.
They do.
Right.
They do.
I mean,
and Mayor Bottoms is already working on that.
Craig and Mike on this show have said this is the party of local control gunning at a power grab, basically. I think there is a very winnable public relations campaign if this does get to that point, and it's almost there. They're almost at the point where they need, a ground game, basically, for lack of a better word, in the same way that HB 316 and HB 481 that we mentioned at the top of the show, they have a ground game, and those are intense, visceral issues. I think the city of Atlanta needs to make this an intense, visceral issue.
That's a great point, and Mayor Bottoms has said several times, number one in efficiency, number one in flights. If you can do better, I'm all ears.
And the second we go to number one in flights, number two in efficiency after the state takes over, oh boy.
Oh yeah.
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 So I think there's plenty of recourse they can take. In terms
careful
of
what you ask for.
Yeah. In terms of the legal avenue, I'm not really sure. I mean, it is property of City of Atlanta. The state would come and establish an authority to run it. A lot of it depends on what that relationship would end up looking like, because the state right now does run a couple things. They have the Port Authority and things like that. I don't know what that relationship would look like.
Mm-hmm.
I've just been saying for so long, this can look a little less of a total takeover than it is. I mean, I understand the reaction to these indictments that are coming down, but first of all, those people are gone. And I don't understand why we can't get satisfaction of saying, hey, there has to be more oversight here. And then the city of Atlanta and the state come together and say, okay, how would a airport oversight committee look? Speaker's designee, lieutenant governor's designee. And then at any whiff of anything happening in the airport, they're on top of it. And you're basically going on trial in front of this oversight committee. I just think that's a much more responsible approach to this.
Slightly less extreme.
Yeah. I don't understand why it has to be so extreme, but
so
here we are.
To Taylor's question, it's the best answer I think we can give you. We'll look into that though. We'll have some follow up in the next few episodes.
But there's certainly lots of
yes
options they have in terms of the legal ones. I don't know.
We'll find out.
I usually,
if there's a lawyer listening that has a better answer than that on the legal front, call us on the phone line and we'll get you.
When I have a question pop into my head that goes, "Can the governor do that?" Usually my answer falls with yes.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Now's the last question. Okay.
Yes.
John from Alpharetta asks, which one of the panelists that have appeared on the Georgia Politics podcast is most likely to be governor one day?
Gosh, the betting markets
Good
are
question.
flying right now.
All right, so we got to think who all's been on the show.
Should we exclude the two of us? I don't want to do that, man. That seems hard.
So that rules you out for your answer.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe you might be on my answer. But so let's give a rundown. So we've done a few episodes.
Craig Kidd, Mike Kennedy, Paula V. Perkaista. I hope I got that one right.
Alpharetta City Councilman Ben Burnett.
Mm-hmm.
Activist David Heenan.
Political consultant Eamon Keegan. Fred Hicks,
another political consultant. And then you and I.
Mm-hmm.
Are we missing anyone?
No.
It'd be bad if we were missing someone.
You're on the top of my list. I don't know why.
No, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mike likes to come on and introduce himself as someone that does time on the city council. It does not seem like he was ultimately fond of that time. Well, I can't imagine he's going to have an easier path to governor.
We should point out, so of that list, the only two elected officials are Mike Kennedy and Ben Burnett.
Craig is elected by his state party.
He is elected by his state party. Apologies, Craig. That is true. I'm going to go Paula V.
Wow.
Yep.
I'm sure she'll be very happy to hear that.
Going
and by
Paula
that,
V.
I mean not happy at all.
She knows her stuff. She's young. She's got, I think, a bright future. She has a track record of winning campaigns. And I don't think she's going anywhere. So she's maybe my dark horse candidate, but I'm going to go Paula V.
Place your bets now, folks.
Yeah.
For 2050 something. I don't know.
Yeah. Good question, though. Thank you all for the questions.
Yeah, those were great.
Keep sending them in.
Let's wrap up for the week. We're going to do it the same way, even though this was a little bit different of an episode. We're going to talk about what we're thinking of for the next week. And I'm thinking of, for this upcoming week in terms of news, why Hans is having to talk about Beto O'Rourke for the 4th consecutive episode. So let's get into it. Why are you about to tell me why Beto's about to win the presidency?
Well, now I'm going to change it.
No, give me an opportunity to.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about Beto and give it a twist. So Beto jumped into the race yesterday morning and has already seen millions of dollars in contributions pouring in. He's an interesting candidate in that he hasn't taken a lot of policy positions, especially for someone who just ran a race for senator in Texas. And that's going to change. He's going to have to start going on record on how he feels about the Green New Deal and Medicare for All. But I did see he has already called himself a capitalist. So it looks like he's going to take more of the...
I can't believe we're having to ask that question.
I know. And it's just absolutely crazy.
But he can fall into whatever the zeitgeist is. You know, this is his advantage, is that people do see him as a blank slate. So he can fall in wherever it is, and there's not a huge extensive record. Like if Biden or Sanders were to say something, you can go back, check 30 years of C-SPAN to figure out if that's actually true.
Sure.
Beto has a little bit of an advantage in that way, or what I would call a disadvantage, in that he's not really the most experienced candidate.
So we talked a little bit earlier about Stacey jumping into the race. Same question. Who does this benefit the most? Who does this hurt the most?
Beto jumping into the race?
Jumping in, yeah.
I stick with the same answer.
Okay.
I think it benefits the older, more experienced, moderate candidates. I think it probably takes away from the jump starts that are similar to Beto, and that they just split the entire rest of the field. I mean, and the polling reflects that answer too. Sanders and Biden are both polling around 25. Everybody else is like 12 and below.
Okay.
And with about 7 candidates all at around 1%.
So you think a lot of this primary is going to be divided over age and experience?
I think
you're going to have sort of 2 classes of candidates.
If Stacey jumps in, I think it has to get there. It will be a top issue because all the platforms are, again, going to be relatively similar too. So what else do you talk about? Biden's going to campaign on his ability to work with everybody.
Socialist versus capitalists.
Well, Biden's going to campaign on his ability to work with everybody.
Sure.
And his years of extensive experience. And he's going to do that without calling out the others by name, but it is a call out pretty much. So I don't know. They'll have to talk about it.
Well, so that would be my last thing I'll be looking at is supposedly Joe Biden and Stacey Abrams are kind of the 2 last viable candidates to decide whether or not they're going to jump in. So that'll be one thing I'm looking for. We're at 14 right now. So if they both jumped in, which I think it's probably likely they do, it kind of rounds out the field at 16 candidates.
Yep.
For the Democratic nominee.
Nice round number.
Yeah.
Not. Okay. What I'm really looking forward to this week is we have the Gwinnett Marta vote. We've talked about it so much, and it's finally coming up. I have no indication of how it's going to go. I'm not sure anybody has any hard number of what they're looking at, but it looks close. So I'm excited to see how that goes. Gwinnett has a really good opportunity to get a really good deal that's on the table here. More because they're going to come back to the same deal in 15 years, and it's not going to look as good. So,
and I don't want to make any predictions either. I agree. I think it will be close. The one thing I will say is I would encourage everyone, no matter how you feel about it right now, to get some facts on it. Really do your homework and understand what's being proposed and what the benefits and the drawbacks are, because I have seen disinformation on both sides of it.
Yeah. And there's not a benefit of these huge budgets that can come in and try and inform people who they're trying to get to vote for them. This is all trying to be thrown together. So yeah, I agree with you. I'm also in agreement with these should be held on actual election days for that reason.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of a mid-March referendum. So it benefits a very particular class of people that can go out on a Tuesday morning and go do this. But anyways, That phone number for our voicemail line, one more time, 770-376-7403. Leave us a message. We'll play it on the show. That's going to do it for us this week. Subscribe to the show. Follow us on Twitter at GA Politics Pod. Is that our Twitter handle?
GA Politics Pod.
Got it. GA Politics Pod. Tweet
That's
at us
at
there.
GA Politics Pod. One more time.
That little A with the squiggle around it. The kids tell me it's an @ sign.
And call us. We want to play your voices on the next show. So leave us a message. Tell us what you like about the show, or if you have a question, give us a question. We'll try to get it answered for you.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. Until next week, when we've got a whole nother set of issues to talk about. Preston Thompson signing off for Hans Appen, and we'll talk to everybody on the next one.
See you guys.